ISIS or ISIL, known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and by its Arabic acronym Daesh, was a radical Islamist group that was almost a state that followed the Salafi jihadist branch of Sunni Islam. It was founded in 1999 and gained notoriety in 2014, when it drove Iraqi security forces out of key cities during the Anbar campaign. This was followed by its capture of Mosul. ISIS participated in the Iraqi insurgency against coalition forces following the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In 2014, the group proclaimed itself to be a worldwide caliphate and began referring to itself as the Islamic State. As a caliphate, it claimed religious, political, and military authority over Muslims worldwide. In Syria, the group conducted ground attacks against both Syrian government forces and Syrian opposition factions. By the end of 2015, it held an area that contained an estimated 8 to 12 million people and stretched from western Iraq to eastern Syria, where it enforced its interpretation of Islamic law. It was this view of Islamic law that the group claimed legitimized the destruction of ancient sites as religiously motivated. Its militants targeted well-known ancient sites along with more modern graves and shrines belonging to other Muslim sects, citing idol worship to justify their actions. At the same time, ISIS has used looting as a money-making venture to finance military operations. Let's dive into the sites that ISIS destroyed or damaged severely. The city of Palmyra. Palmyra prospered for centuries in the desert east of Damascus as an oasis and stop for caravans on the Silk Road. Part of the Roman Empire, it became an extremely wealthy city-state. It reached its zenith in the late 3rd century when it was ruled by Queen Zenobia. She led a rebellion against the Romans, which ultimately leading to its destruction in AD 273. Its colonnaded avenues and impressive temples were preserved by the desert climate, and in the 20th century the city was one of Syria's biggest tourist destinations. ISIS seized the modern town of Palmyra and the ancient ruins nearby. The militants initially promised to leave the site's columns and temples untouched. But that all changed when they executed Khalid al-Assad, a Syrian archaeologist who oversaw excavations at the site for decades. To confirm their barbarism, they hung his headless body from a column. They then blew up the 1900-year-old Temple of Balshaman, which was one of the best preserved buildings, converting the once magnificent structure to rubble. Just days later, explosions were reported at the Temple of Baal, a nearby structure that was one of the site's largest. It too was turned to rubble. Marb Monastery. The Christian monastery called Marb was captured by ISIS militants when they overran Al-Qaryatayn near Palmyra. Dedicated to a 4th century saint, it was an important pilgrimage site and sheltered hundreds of Syrian Christians. ISIS posted pictures of them breaking down its walls with heavy machinery. Apamea. Apamea had been an extremely wealthy trading town that had been heavily looted since the start of Syria's civil war. Satellite imagery shows dozens of casual excavation pits dug across the site and all manner of treasures removed for sale on the black market, including previously unknown Roman mosaics. On their arrival, ISIS arranged to receive a percentage of the sales of these ancient artifacts, making tens of millions of pounds to fund their terror operations. Duryuropos. The Greek settlement on the Euphrates not far from Syria's border with Iraq, Duryuropos later became one of Rome's easternmost outposts. It housed the world's oldest known Christian church, a beautifully decorated synagogue, and many other temples and Roman-era buildings. Satellite pictures shows a lunar landscape of widespread destruction. Mari. Mari flourished in the Bronze Age, between 3000 and 1600 BC. Archaeologists have discovered palaces, temples, and extensive archives written on clay tablets that shed light on the early days of civilization in the region. According to reports from locals and satellite imagery, the site, especially the royal palace, was mostly destroyed by ISIS. Hatra. Built in the 3rd century BC, Hatra was the capital of an independent kingdom on the outskirts of the Roman Empire and a major trading hub for the Silk Road. In 2014, Hatra was taken over by ISIS and reportedly used as an ammo dump and training camp. A video released by ISIS in April 2015 showed fighters using sledgehammers and automatic weapons to destroy sculptures in several of the site's largest buildings. Nineveh. Ancient Assyria was one of the first true empires, expanding aggressively across the Middle East and controlling a vast stretch of the ancient world between 900 and 600 BC. The Assyrian kings ruled their realm from a series of capitals of which Nineveh was one, and it would become the largest city in the world. Its location on the outskirts of Mosul made it a target for ISIS. Many of the site's sculptures were housed in the Mosul Museum and some were damaged during the rampage through the museum. Men were also shown smashing half-human, half-animal guardian statues called lamasis on Nineveh's ancient Nergal Gate. Mosul Museum and Libraries. Reports of looting at Mosul's libraries and universities began to surface almost as soon as ISIS occupied the city. Centuries-old manuscripts were stolen, and thousands of books disappeared into the shadowy international black market. Mosul University's library was burned, the Central Public Library, a landmark built in 1921, blown up together with thousands of manuscripts and instruments used by Arab scientists. ISIS fighters also rampaged through the Mosul Museum, toppling statues, and smashing others with hammers. The museum was Iraq's second largest, after the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. Statues. Nimrud. Nimrud was the first Assyrian capital, founded 3,200 years ago. Its rich decoration reflected the empire's power and wealth. The site was excavated beginning in the 1840s by British archaeologists, who sent dozens of its massive stone sculptures to museums around the world, including New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum in London. But many originals remained in Iraq and at the mercy of ISIS. The site itself is massive, an earthen wall surrounds 890 acres. ISIS bulldozed parts of the site, but the extent of the damage isn't yet clear. Some of the city was never uncovered and remains underground and therefore protected. Marb Monastery. Established in the 4th century, the monastery was dedicated to an early Christian saint. The holy site, maintained since the late 1800s by Syriac Catholic monks, survived the Mongol hordes in the 1200s but could not survive ISIS, who blew up the saint's tomb and its elaborate carvings and decorations. Mosque of the Prophet Eunice. Mosul's Mosque of the Prophet Eunice was dedicated to the biblical figure Jonah, considered a prophet by many Muslims. But ISIS adheres to an extreme interpretation of Islam that sees veneration of prophets like Jonah as forbidden. ISIS fighters evacuated the mosque and demolished it with explosives. Like many of Iraq's sites, the mosque was built on top of a Christian church that in turn had been built on one of the two mounds that made up the Assyrian city of Nineveh. Imam Dur Mausoleum. The Imam Dur Mausoleum, not far from the city of Samarra, was the epitome of medieval Islamic architecture and decoration. It too was not spared by ISIS, been reduced to rubble. Thankfully the presence of ISIS has all but been destroyed. Despite this, we are left with the sad truth that during their short time on this earth, they destroyed artifacts and history that is simply irreplaceable. Such intolerance and hatred for things that represent who we were and who we are should not be allowed in this modern world we live in.